Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of ThinkerThemer. I'm Amy, the thinker. I'm all about mechanics in life. I'm the planner, I'm the rigid one, I'm the one that doesn't live in the moment. And do you know who tells me that? This guy.
You're making me sound like I'm a terrible partner.
Maggie lives in the moment. Maggie's the dreamer, the musician, the storyteller, the themer on our channel. And we review games based on the way that we approach life, but also the way that that translates to how we look at games. All I can see is mechanics and very little theme. And Maggie can't learn a mechanic without a great theme. So
it's very difficult, yeah. I've become so aware of that. If the mechanics are not very well integrated with the theme, I really struggle, yeah.
And so we like to look at generally heavier Euros from that perspective. And today we are looking at a 2020 release, Merv, a game by Fabio Lopiano, who some of you might recognize from other games like Kalamala. And the art is all done by Ian O'Toole. And if you're into gaming, you'll recognize that name instantly. Anything that Ian O'Toole touches, we are going to be checking out.
Big fans.
So tell us about Merv.
So in Merv, we are in the city of Merv in the 12th century. Now, at the time, this was like the hot spot for trades and for making your riches and building up things. It was just like hustling and bustling, and it was part of the Silk Road. It also happened to be the most populous city in the world with the largest population up until the unfortunate time when the Mongols came in and essentially tore through the entire city and destroyed it to the point where 70% of the population was eradicated. And that same threat is what we face in this game. So in the game of Merv, we are going to be building up the city, trading, trying to get a bit of a reputation with our political influence and favors in the court. But then we also have to be mindful and protect ourselves or protect our buildings from the incoming Mongol attack.
Now, at the heart of this game, it is a point salad. And if you're not familiar with that term, a point salad means you're simply collecting points in different spots around the board by taking different types of actions. And ultimately, at the end of the game, you want to be the person who has the most victory points. But with a point salad, you might not all go about doing that in the same way. So instead of being a linear game that requires you to go through a set number of steps, you can kind of choose a strategy or bits and pieces of different strategies to get things done. Now, what makes Merv really interesting is the central part of the board, which is an action selection system made out of a 5x5 grid of tiles that are randomly placed at the start of the game. Now, the game takes place over 3 years, and within each year, you get to have 4 turns. So if you can do the maths on that, you get 12 turns only in this game, which is actually not a lot of time to get things done. Now, on each of those turns, you are simply taking your master meeple and you're moving it to one of these action spots along the outside of this grid. And when you place it, you choose a action tile to activate to take the associated action that's shown on that tile. But what's really interesting about this game is you not only get the action of the tile you choose. For example, I could choose to activate this top tile if I went here, but you also get the resources associated with each of that colored building, in this case, my own buildings, on each of the tiles within that column. So that means that if you can stack kind of your buildings all together, then you're getting that momentum. But what else is interesting in this game is that if I decided to go here instead, I could also activate the red player's building, one of their buildings, take the associated action and still get every resource for that building's color in that column. So why do you want to use your colored buildings versus someone else's in this game? Because there is a bit of positive player interaction in that if I activate your building, you also get to take the resource of the action tile that I've selected, plus some other bonuses if you've got bonuses on your tiles. And so that means that when I'm considering what to activate, I need to think about, well, what is the action that I want to get done? But then I'm also giving Maggie some resources for free.
Yes.
And nobody likes to give out resources for free. I don't know why they call it positive player interaction anyway. It's not very positive
for me.
And so the different actions you can get done around the board are really like a marketplace where you can trade cubes that you're collecting, these colored cubes. Do we find out what those cubes are?
I don't know what the cubes actually are. That's
Not
a
sure.
bad themer of me. To be fair, it doesn't seem to actually matter. That's a spoiler alert in terms of what's to come in terms of when we talk about theme.
But anyway, I'm happy with them being colored cubes. But in the marketplace, you can swap them for resources, and or you can swap them in the library for scrolls. And scrolls and resources are going to help you fulfill contracts. And contracts are worth victory points. I mean, we've all been here, done that.
Yes.
You know how this works. The other interesting mechanic in this game is a set collection kind of side game where you can collect cards of different types of spices, which allows you to then, you know, if you've got pairs of the same spice, you get a bonus. If you've got variation in spices, you count those sets at the end of the game for more victory points. And another thing that you can get done is you can travel up this mosque. And when you're moving up this path, you get to activate bonuses along the way, unlock new scoring conditions, bonus victory points, but it costs you a lot of resources to move up that path. The other thing, and what's interesting about this game, is that you get to manipulate the scoring conditions for yourself, not for other people, but for yourself. At the bottom of the board, there is this high court area where you get to put meeples or courtiers in your speak, Maggie. You can put these meeples down in one of these 4 scoring conditions. And that means at the end of each round, because there's a scoring at the end of each round as well as at the end of the game, you get to count, you know, for this one's going to give me 1 victory point for every scroll, but then you also need to use this favor track to activate that scoring condition every time there's an opportunity for it to be scored. And so throughout the game, you need to increase your favor track so that you can exchange that in order to activate the scoring condition. Now, there's some other tracks. There's an influence track at the top. But I think the other interesting thing about this game is that year 1, the city is safe. Year 2 and year 3, the city is under attack. And when the Mongols come in to attack the city, this is set in a time when it was under Turkish rule, and this is actually, as Maggie was explaining, this is what happened. Of course, the buildings are going to be destroyed in the town centre, and part of the scoring condition is you get points for every building that remains standing. So throughout the year, you need to be protecting your buildings by collecting enough resources to build up these walls to protect the buildings that are within the city centre. What's interesting about that process is that you get points for protecting your own buildings, and that's obviously what you want to do, but you get more points if you protect other people's buildings, and it gives you more influence, which allows you to unlock more things that you can do throughout the game. And so that is kind of an interesting tension where you don't really want to help other people. You don't really want to give them free resources.
You don't really want to help.
I definitely don't want to help. But that is kind of what happens in this game. So at the end of the 3 years, the person who has the most victory points is the winner. One of my other favorite mechanisms about this game is actually the turn order selection kind of system, or the way that it works, because camels are a currency in this game, and one of their main functions is to allow you to go first in the turn order, which becomes more important later in the game. And the way that this game works for a 2-player game is you will have an NPC or a fake player that kind of has a set way of moving. It's not that difficult to implement. It's simply just building buildings in your way to make sure that there's other things to activate and to make sure that you don't have too much choice. So as they're moving around, as we're all moving around, so after 1 round we'd all take our selection, you then get to choose based on the person furthest away if they want to go first, second or third, but they automatically go third. If they want to go second or first, they need to pay camels to these spots in order to move up to first place. And then the subsequent people would be able to move there and take that camel. Or if the next person, Maggie here, wanted to go second, she would have to leave another camel, which would mean that I would get 2 camels for going last.
So let's talk about the thematic integration in Merv. First off, production quality, components, extremely high. beautiful artwork. I love the camel meeples. They are just
Cameeples.
the cameeples. They are just adorable. I loved also probably the element that I appreciated the most was the historical element that is included in the rule book as part of the flavor text and the exposition of what Merv was and everything that kind of went down at the time. When it comes to the experience of playing the game, though, even though there are nods to, yes, there's a market and yes, there's a mosque that you're kind of building your way up or using, I would see it as offerings because you are spending resources to kind of get some favors back. I haven't really felt like, I am building the city. Probably the only exception to that is the walls. When you are building walls, that is very thematically linked to the area where I'm putting a wall is the side that I'm protecting those buildings from the attack of the Mongols.
And there's a physicality to them as well, which obviously helps.
Exactly. Aside from that, even though in theory the actions that you're taking thematically should kind of make sense or are kind of linked to what things that you were doing at the time, that's not my experience playing the game. It just feels like a puzzle. So I am just figuring out a puzzle and different ways of scoring these points. When it comes to the actual resources, they're just really colored cubes. And that's exactly what it feels like to me. Like at no point, there's no real thematic integration as to which ones do what, or at least I haven't seen or felt that thread. I don't think they even have a label in the rule book. They're just like resources of
the
different colors. Yeah. I imagine in my mind I make them into spices or
like silk and all the usual suspects of resource cube naming.
Yeah. There are some spices when you go to the caravans. What's the term? It's like caravansing.
Caravansing.
Yeah, something like that. I'll put it on the screen because it's something that we can never say. We can never get it right. And you are kind of collecting those spices. But again, it doesn't actually make any thematic sense why you get the bonus that you get when you're doing that.
Yeah, I think for me, the theme comes through. It relies heavily on the artwork.
Yes.
The color, like the brightness of the entire board and of all the components. I'm not that into theme, but for me, it just reminds me of being in Turkey. It reminds me of being in a spice market. There's just that vibrancy and life to the artwork that Tool has brought to this game. So for me, that's enough theme for me, but it could really, when you talk about it, you're right. It could really, the puzzles and everything could be anything.
Yeah.
Now we should talk about our experiences playing Merv. And this is a game that will be staying in our collection, but probably not for the reasons that you think. So I want to start by talking about the multiplayer experience and caveat that with the fact that Maggie and I have only played this at 2 players, and it probably feels like it would be a little bit better at 3 players or 4 players because, as I mentioned, the static third player in a 2-player game, very easy to implement, but it has kind of a reliable set of things that it does so that you can anticipate what it's going to do. You do get to choose a little bit along the way how and where it builds buildings, but it's just not the same as another character who's racing you for the car or taking the card that you want or the contracts that you want.
Yeah.
So I imagine that would get better. As a 2-player experience, it lacked a bit of tension for Maggie and I. And if you're familiar with the types of games that we review on this channel, the ones that we absolutely love, they all have quite a strong competitive element. Not always directly competitive, not always aggressive, but definitely they feel nice and tight. They feel like you are under a lot of pressure, and often they can be a little bit punishing as well.
Very punishing sometimes,
Yeah, and I think that for me, when we were playing this, it felt a little bit like I was meandering, and not because I had lacked direction, but because I never felt truly locked out of what I wanted to do. Even if it meant I had to do it in a different order, it felt like there was always something that I could get done, and I never felt like that same tension, that lean-in effect of, I just need to do a few things and I have only a few turns left. And it never felt that way, which, is something that actually works for a lot of people. So by all means, like for us, it's really difficult for us to say that a gameplay isn't our style without condemning the game, because the game here would really suit you if you do like that more relaxed experience where everybody can be working on something different and you're not really disrupting each other. But it's not, I wouldn't go so far as to say that it's a multiplayer solitaire, because you are interacting a lot in the centerpiece. You don't have your own player board. It's all happening here. It's just not particularly aggressive or tight, and that is would make it difficult for us to get it to the table, even when we do have 3 or 4 people, because of the gamers that we have in our group who are really kind of
really intense group. I've just realized.
Really intense, but also, but not just with each other, but with themselves. Like they want to feel that tension and that like on the edge of your seat. And this game to me, once you actually learn the rules, is not that difficult. I wouldn't call this a heavy game. I would call it probably, it's an easy game to understand all the pieces. It's probably the difficulty comes into actually forming a plan for yourself when there's a lot going on and when you're trying to work out this center board. Once you understand that, I feel like there's not too many different strategies that you could take.
Yeah, that's why I realized that again, when a theme is really well integrated into a game, I can learn it very quickly. And with this one, I really struggled. Again, not because it's a complicated game, but just because it's like you're literally just learning all these separate puzzles, but there's no real thematic connection between them.
The center of the board is fairly abstract.
Yeah.
It's like an abstract puzzle game.
Yeah.
And so that Maggie struggles with abstract games, and so I can totally see why that didn't come together quickly for you. For me, I just felt as though, it took a game for me to understand the integration and how to use resources to my advantage and the things that are worth more points and all of the different tracks. There's always that fun exploration in a game, but it didn't leave me feeling like I just can't wait to play it again and to do something different or play something differently. I like I said, it feels like a fairly casual, like a nice game. And that's not to say that that's not for other people. In fact, the reason why we bought this game, or the reason that it bumped straight up into our like must get it immediately, was because Rado listed it as, he said it would definitely be in his top 10 of the year, and it was his #1 game of last month. And I hold that in great esteem, and I can totally see, if you're familiar with his channel, he likes to call him and his wife Care Bears.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the type of game that this is. It's a really nice, forgiving kind of puzzle where no matter what you're doing, you can get something done.
And you're actually quite highly rewarded for helping out other players as well, in terms of like some of the tracks and things that, which we don't
we don't want to help each other. We don't want to help each other. And actually, it's probably a terrible strategy not to help each other, because some games require it.
There's a lot of games where I now kind of look at it and go, actually, we never play co-ops, and even some of the competitive games, if you did kind of co-op a little bit, if you kind of, got together and did a little bit of a plan to get yourself set up in a better way, you would overall get a higher score, and you still could keep it competitive, but we never do that.
But I think that's the other thing, is that this game, it's not hard to get a good score. Like, it's quite difficult to get a high score. And because you only have 12 turns,
it's
there's
not
just
a lot of time.
There's not a lot of time to get things done. I feel like that's something else that plays into it, is maybe because it's only 12 turns, I never really feel like I get enough momentum in the game. And so even when I win, and like we had 2 games, one where I won, like doubled Maggie's score, and one where Maggie doubled my score. But the feeling at the end of both of those games was exactly the same.
Yeah.
Like, I just felt like, I don't know.
I just realized one thing, actually. I think part of the reason is because every time the Mongols attack, you're going backwards. So you don't really get to build an engine and get that satisfaction of, as the game progresses, you're producing stuff, you're getting to do better. More stuff, It's like sometimes you can be wiped out and you're almost kind of like back to not quite square one, but close to it kind of thing. So for a game that's so short, it's like, you always feel like you're just being kind of beaten down, which is a weird contradiction between like, well, it's kind of like there's always something you can do, but at the same time, you don't feel like you can get that far, weirdly.
Which is highly thematic, because they were building up their city at the time it was destroyed.
I guess that's the...
so take that, Maggie.
Take that, Themer.
Very thematic.
Yes, okay, I'll take that.
But as I teased at the beginning of this conversation, the long rambly one that I just gave you, there is a reason that we're keeping this on the shelf, and it wasn't the reason why we bought the game. Maggie.
Well, I ventured into playing this solo, and it is a completely different experience, because when you're playing the solo, you're playing against the AI, which is a set of cards, the corrupt magistrate, and that little meeple is so powerful. It is just like you are just taking a beating as the solo player trying to like compete with this tour de force. So that for me actually brought in all of the competitive and the oh my goodness, like what is happening, and like the stress of like I better get my act together, I better, I need to pivot, I need to, like, even playing at 2 players, I never felt like, oh, I need to drastically shift my strategy because all of a sudden I'm locked out. I did feel that with solo mode. So and it does, in a way, it kind of opens your eyes to the areas that are probably more optimized in terms of like almost like peeking behind the curtain of, oh, actually, when I'm playing multiplayer, this is probably some of the strategies that I should be using. And to be fair, in subsequent games after I like ventured into solo mode, I did beat Amy by quite a lot. I don't know if it's just because I kind of had a better understanding of like where the points are. I think like the first game, I completely neglected the area that literally gives you all the end points when you complete the game. So that was not a good strategy. But again, so you do get to explore the board in a very different way. So I really, really enjoy that. It's incredibly difficult. It is a similar experience where the corrupt magistrate will double my score quite easily.
But I had heard that actually about this game. There's been a lot of talk about the solo experience being very, very difficult.
It's very tough.
Which is so it's so interesting to me that it sounds like, and when I've been watching you play, it feels like so much more tense and competitive than the multiplayer experience amongst 2 people that are very tensely competitive with each other. And we couldn't recreate that ourselves.
And we're not actually trying to help each other. So it's not like that was the element that was watering it down.
But the game itself is not punishing us enough to inspire, I guess, that same competitive edge, like the way the solo guys are punishing you.
It's hard work.
So this one for us is a really interesting one because it's staying on our shelf as a solo experience, which is not normally something that we would seek out. It's not something, a big box game for solo, but I think that in 2020 and with lots of people being at home, lots of people being separated from their regular gaming group, more people are looking for solo experiences and hard ones and hard big box game experiences. And so if this one appeals to you, if you like the idea of a multiplayer game that's doesn't have as much conflict, it has that positive player interaction, you can kind of just explore strategies without feeling that stress, this one would definitely be for you. If you want the added bonus of being able to be challenged by a solo
super tough
AI, then in the meantime, before you can get your gaming group back together, that certainly would be a way to become familiar with the game, to make that teach nice and smooth once we're back at our tables. But anyway, that's our review of Merv. If you liked this review, please hit like, mention in the comments if you've played it, if it sounds like a game that you'll get to the table. We'd love to hear from you. We also want to say a big thank you to everyone for joining us here. Thank you to Before You Play for the amazing support that you gave us this week. I don't even have the words. It amazes us that anyone would hang around, let alone those 2 to listen to us talk about anything. So really appreciate the support, all of the new people coming into our channel. Welcome, and can't wait to share more games with you. But as for Merv, that's all for now. Bye.